Week 8 of the fantasy football season. Here's a few defense DST units. I would start this week. The first one, the Los Angeles Chargers. So the Chargers this week, a great matchup with the New Orleans Saints coming to town. There's a possibility Derek Carr does return in this game. But Derek Carr, besides the first two games of the season, he was struggling before he went down with injury. So this Charger defense, they've been playing pretty decent all season long in terms of giving up opponents points, low 20s on the season. So the last few games, week 4 versus Kansas City, 17 points allowed, 3 sacks, an interception, a fumble recovery. Week 6 at Denver, 16 points allowed, 2 sacks, an interception, a fumble recovery. Week 7 at Arizona, 17 points allowed and an interception. So the sacks got to go up a little bit. I know Joey Bosa has been out for this Los Angeles Charger team, but it's a great matchup this week versus the New Orleans Saints. They give up the 8th most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. So we'll see if Derek Carr returns, like I said. But with Spencer Rattler in their quarterback, they've been giving up a lot of points and turning the football over a whole lot as well. So this week, the Chargers start. The next start, the Pittsburgh Steelers defense starting to get into second gear. And last week, they went out there versus a pretty good New York Jet offense and did well. Week 5 versus Dallas, a good ball game. 20 points allowed, 2 sacks, 2 interceptions, a fumble recovery, a block kick. Week 6 at the Raiders, 13 points allowed, a sack, an interception, 2 fumble recoveries, a block kick. And week 7, like I mentioned, versus the Jets, 15 points allowed, 2 interceptions, a sack, and a block kick. So this week, a great matchup with the New York Giants coming to town. We don't know if it's going to be Daniel Jones or Drew Lock coming in, but I believe it'll be Daniel Jones for this New York Giant team. And they get to the quarterback a lot. Daniel Jones last week, he was a crash test dummy, taking a lot of sacks in that ball game where this Giant offensive line's banged up, and they're just not good as well as this O-line for this New York Giants. And now with TJ Watt rushing the passer all game, it's going to be a long day for this Giant team. And I think this Pittsburgh Steelers defense goes out there once again and has a good ball game. Next start, the Green Bay Packers. They've been a solid defense in terms of creating turnovers all season long and getting to the quarterback. And this week, a great matchup at the Jacksonville Jaguars, where their offensive line has been an issue all season long, and Trevor Lawrence has been turning the football over all season long. So the last few games for this pack of DST, week 5 at the Rams, 13 points allowed, 3 sacks, an interception, a fumble recovery. Week 6 versus Arizona, 13 points allowed, 3 fumble recoveries. And last week versus Houston, I know they gave up 22 points, only had 4 sacks, but CJ Stroud was held under 100 yards passing, and that's a very tough task to keep a quarterback like CJ Stroud, who could easily throw for 4,500, 5,000-yard range this season, to hold them under 100 yards passing with the great weapons in that offense. So Green Bay, they make it tough for their opponents. And with Jordan Love at quarterback, they get off to a quick start. Obviously, their offense puts points on the boards and make their defense's job easier. And also, they can make teams one-dimensional if they get off to a 10, 14-point lead early. So with all those factors and a good matchup at the Jaguars, turn the football over a whole lot, and their scoring hasn't been consistent all season long. So this week, definitely a good defense to start. The next DSTs, the Detroit Lions, is a 1-week streaming option. It's a good matchup versus the Tennessee Titans. If it's Mason Rudolph or Will Levis, a quarterback, it just doesn't matter. I believe this line defense could go out there and create havoc. And if the Lions get off to a quick start like we saw the Buffalo Bills do last week, once they got a big lead, they started teeing off on that Tennessee offensive line on Mason Rudolph and making them one-dimensional. So the last few weeks for this line DST, week 4 versus Seattle, 27 points allowed, 3 sacks, an interception, fumble recovery. Week 6 at Dallas, 9 points allowed, 4 sacks, 3 INTs, 2 fumble recoveries. In week 7 in Minnesota, 23 points allowed, 4 sacks and interceptions. So they get to the quarterback even with Aiden Hutchinson out for the remainder of the regular season. And the Titans give up the 3rd most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. So I think this week, once again, Detroit, home game, they'll get off to an early start, get a nice lead, and they'll make this Tennessee offense one-dimensional and start teeing off in this one. In the 5th and final defense DST, I would start the Kansas City Chiefs. I believe Kansas City, one of the best units in all pro football. And this week, a slam dunk matchup at the Vegas Raiders. I give up the 2nd most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. So the last few games for Kansas City, it hasn't been eye-popping off the charts in terms of fantasy points, but in terms of holding opponents down, they've really done that. Week 5 versus New Orleans, 13 points allowed, a sack and interception. In week 7 at San Francisco, 18 points allowed, a sack, 3 interceptions. So they create turnovers as this Kansas City defense. Great matchup, like I said, at the Vegas Raiders. Gardner Minshew back in the starting quarterback position with Aiden O'Connell out with a broken thumb. And Kansas City, they get to the quarterback, they create turnovers. And this week, I could believe they could be a top 3, top 4 defense overall. That's a few defense DST units I would start for week 8 of the fantasy football season.